Sorry I'm late.
Oh, it's okay. We're glad you're here.
That coffee is hot.
Isn't that the worst?
Oh, I just burnt my tongue.
You know what? You think that's hot? You gotta try that burn, like 10 billion times worse, all over your entire body as you fall into the pits of hell because you haven't surrendered your life over to the will of Jesus Christ. Huh? That's a burn you won't get over. Saved you a cookie.
Hey everybody, welcome back to session 3. I'm excited to dig in here and let's end on a big note. I realized the last session was probably a little heavy, and I brought the thunder there at the end. Sorry about that, but I hope it inspired some important conversations between then and now and to go beyond. So let's go ahead and lighten it up a little bit. I have a question for you, and it's super important. In our home, it's an argument that I need you to help me figure out. It's also an argument amongst the staff at Orange students for whatever reason, but mac and cheese, is it a side dish or a main dish? Is it a side dish or a main dish? Mac and cheese. Ready? Go. Well, I'm sure the conversation was pretty good. I'm about to drop my opinion. If you want to talk about it, you better pause me. But in my opinion, in my humble opinion, the answer is yes. Mac and cheese is a side dish and it is a main course. And it depends what else is in it. You put a little lobster in it, that's a main course, right? You cut up little hot dogs to go in the craft. In college, that was a main course for me. It depends on who you're with. If I'm alone, no problem making a main course. If I'm with my wife, she'll completely judge me, so it's not a main course. And then it also depends on how much you paid for it. I mean, if it was a 79-cent box of mac and cheese, maybe a side. If it was a $12 mac and cheese in an iron crock, and I'm imagining a specific mac and cheese right now, a little bit of a connoisseur, love it. I would say it's a main meal. And that actually has something to do with today. But before we get there, I want to jump back in and talk about how this pandemic has forced us to change, specifically how it's forced us to think in different ways to connect. And you guessed it, I want to talk about another revolutionary thinker. But before we do, I want to quickly review the big ideas of our theme, revolution. Revolutions, reformations, and movements are rarely the result of new information, but thinking differently about what we already know. We talked about thinking simpler, the same way Eli Whitney thought about interchangeable parts. We talked about thinking backwards, the way Kobayashi thought about attacking the competitive eating world. We talked about thinking upside down, the way that Cheryl Batchelder turned Popeyes around. We talked about thinking beyond, the way MLK thought beyond just civil rights. He thought about a world beyond where things were just fixed, but a world where people just didn't even understand the way that was. We talked about thinking irreverently in the way Luther really questioned himself. He questioned the system. How is this system limiting my perspective of what God is in the world? We talked about Jeff Bezos, and that's really what we dug into that first day. Think again, or think from the ground up. If we could build it again, knowing what we know now and purposefully unknowing what we know, how would we build it? And that's what we did really in session 1. Session 2, we jumped in and we talked about Jim Rayburn, and we said, maybe some of the scariest questions of all, he thought critically. And he thought the question, what if we're the problem? And we face some of the hardest facts in student ministry. We talked about the fact that we're losing our students. We talked about the fact that if you have 10 ninth grade girls, you're probably going to have 5 when they graduate if you're an average ministry, and we are not going to be average ministries. We talked about focusing on the relationship over the program, because kids leave programs, they don't leave people. We talk about giving them a safe place to ask real questions, making the church a place where they really can go for answers to real questions that they have. And today, I want to jump in. We also talked about giving them a safe place just in general. We zeroed in on what it means to make our ministries a truly safe place. I personally think this one question, if taken seriously and purposely, will revolutionize your ministry and what you do. It's really a big deal. And so again, I want to jump in here and talk about a new revolutionary thinker. And this is the revolutionary thinker I want to introduce you today. Anybody know her name? Actually, she does have a name, and she's not a thinker. She represents tens of thousands of women who thought differently. This is Rosie the Riveter, famous in World War II. And I'd like to say that Rosie the Riveter, or the women who she represents, they think or thought daringly. And the question that they asked is, what never before considered options are now my options? They lived in a world where a good majority of the male population was off to war. And the U.S. economy needed to continue, and the troops needed supplies. And so what never before considered options are now my options. And they jumped in and they did amazing things. And in the short term, they helped us win the war and keep the economy running. We know how important keeping the economy running is in our world today. But in the long term, it actually led to some changes that were probably overdue, which leads us to our student ministry today. We've had to consider options we've never had time to consider before. We've had to consider options that honestly we probably should have considered before, simply because we didn't have any options, and therefore hopefully leads to this reformation or this revolution. And as I dive in, I just want to encourage you. You have done some amazing things. I talk to a lot of discouraged youth workers, and I just want you to know you have blazed some important trails that are going to matter down the line, and we have made some important changes. I talk to people all the time. Like, I text the kids, and I rarely get a response back. And I'm like, yeah, just like before when you'd ask, what did you learn today? Nothing. I mean, that was the same thing live. It's basically the same thing now. My daughter, literally today, we're quarantined because my son's girlfriend has COVID. So we're stuck here waiting for some tests. And ding dong, bell rings. It's her small group leader who's bringing her cookies, or bringing us cookies for the family, which is amazing. But I got to tell you, about 15 minutes later, my wife asked my daughter, did you text your small group leader to tell her thank you? And she hadn't. So just that idea that you've reached out and they haven't texted you back, guess what? That's a 9th grade girl. That's just kind of the way it is. So I just want to encourage you. You're doing much better than you think you're doing. And this is going to be a much more fruitful time than I think we think it's going to be. So let's jump into that. Today I want to use the book Lead Small as kind of the structure of what we're going to be talking about and the structure of our exercises. This book was written, I don't even know, maybe 10 years ago. And it's really just a job description for small group leaders. And I want to jump in and do a quick overview of the structure of Lead Small, just in case you haven't read it, which I'm guessing many of you haven't. And again, that will be the structure for our conversation, the structure for our exercises as we move forward. I think it would be wise if you had 5 3x5 cards really to write down some of these big ideas. But the job description of Lead Small, again, we wrote it years ago by putting a bunch of the best small group leaders around the table and asking them one question. That question was this: if you were to talk to a new small group leader, what's the one thing you would tell them? And they would talk for a couple hours. So we did that a few times, and it really boiled down to 10 or 15 ideas, which we boiled down further into 5 big ideas, each of which have 3 subpoints. So 15 big ideas about being a small group leader. The first real big idea is this idea of be present. The number one spiritual guide of the number one spiritual gift of a small group leader is the gift of showing up. You can't have a gift, you can't affect a kid without seeing them. Now, we often used to think of that just physically, and that's what we're going to dive into. But we train our leaders to show up predictably, show up mentally, and show up randomly. Show up every Sunday, show up prepared, and show up in their world in different ways. Again, we keep thinking about showing up at the play or the basketball game, but there are different ways to show up, and we're going to jump into that. The second one, my favorite, create a safe place. Create a safe place. It's one of the things a small group leader has to do. The number one thing that describes a safe place is that at the center of it is a safe person. That's why we have to recruit the right people, and we train our small group leaders to lead the group We train them to respect the process, or what we were talking about yesterday, respond safely to questions, tough questions. Don't panic. Respect the process of a kid and really guard the heart. And that's physically and mentally and emotionally. We need to think about creating that safe place for kids to ask questions, to struggle, to have secrets, and to tell us things they maybe have never told anybody before. So that's the second of the 5 big ideas. The third of the 5 of the big ideas is this: best small group leaders, they partner with parents. They partner with parents without even being asked to. The best small group leaders cue the parent. They give the parent the opportunity to kind of jump on to what we talked about today in the ministry. They honor the parent and the fact that one of the easiest ways to get a kid to like you is to say, yeah, your mom must be crazy too, or something like that. But we have to honor the parents in the midst of it, even though there are some crazy mamas. And we have to reinforce the family, meaning that a lot of our kids will come to us and their families aren't Christians. But at the end of the day, we want to reinforce what God has put together to the best we can. Of course, for that small percentage where there's something going on, we want to do what we can to protect the kids. But in general, we want to reinforce the family. So that's the third thing. The fourth thing great small group leaders do is they make it personal. That small group is a personal thing for them. Small group is not their small group with their students, but they have their own small group. So they be in community. They set their priorities, meaning you should go to your sister's wedding and miss small group, and you should model that for your kids there. But you should also skip some things to make small group a priority. And so that's it. And then the last one really is one of my favorites. It's be real. You don't need to put on the gold chain and pretend you're something you're not. You're a programmer. You're a whatever. Just come be who you are. Kids can smell somebody faking it 1,000 miles away. So just be yourself. Again, make it personal. The fourth big thing for small group leaders. And the last one, great small group leaders move them out. They move them to someone else. They understand they're not the only adult a kid needs, so they may move them to the next part, or they share with a co-leader, one of my favorite strategies in student ministry. They move them to be the church. Again, we talk about mobilizing their faith. We're going to jump into this a little bit today. I think it's one of the keys to keeping our kids engaged. When they become the church, they don't leave the church. And then there's this last one, is move them to what's next. Thinking about that they're going on to a different ministry, going on to college, those sorts of things. We're going to jump in and have some really cool conversations about that. And now that everybody has that framework down and you have it kind of 5 of them in front of them, I want to really talk about what Lead Small is. Again, when we first wrote Lead Small for many ministries, large group program was the only time students connected. At that time, the main connection point was in person at a certain time, and sometimes side conversations happen digitally. Obviously, in today's world, we've kind of flipped that. Some ministries are meeting entirely digitally, with every once in a while they're meeting in person. It's kind of like this. It's kind of a main dish and a side dish approach. In the old days, the main dish was meeting at a certain time in a certain place, and this is where we did ministry. And if we were lucky, and the great small groups would meet outside of that world. They would meet outside of that world physically. They would meet outside of that world digitally, because we live in a digital world these days. And that was kind of the way it went. These days, it switched. This is the main dish. Digital is the main dish. And every once in a while, we might get a chance to be together physically, or at least for a while. I think it's a helpful metaphor as we jump in to all that. But here's the great news. Here's the exciting news, I think, is that what was true before is still true. The 5 Lead Small principles are still the best way to lead the group. And at the same time, they look a little bit different in digital spaces, but the big ideas, the big things, the great small group leaders are still doing that. So you can use that framework, that discussion, as the vocabulary of your ministry, as you're talking to your leaders, as you're thinking through how you connect with your students. So here's what I want to do. I want to take those 5 categories and I want to start sharing best practices, get super practical, get super thoughtful about just some ideas that have worked. You've had some ideas that have worked. You've had some ideas that haven't worked. Ideas that didn't work are not necessarily bad ideas. They just might be the idea on the way to what will work. So what I'd love for you to do is, as a group, we're going to take a few minutes and we're going to dig into this idea of being Present. Being present. You've got that card in front of you. Being present. What are new ways to be present? I would think both physically and digitally. What are new ways to be present for students? Think both physically and digitally. Share ideas, share what works, share what you've heard, and we're going to spend a few minutes talking about that. So I'm going to get up. You guys are going to have a discussion, or you're going to think through it, or you're going to get on a Skype call or a Zoom call, or you're going to get on a phone call, and you're going to talk it through with somebody and just do that exercise. And then I'll be back in a few minutes and we will dig in and talk about some of the things that we're seeing are working across this world. But again, the best ideas are your ideas. The best ideas are the ideas that go after your students in your context, in your church. So with that, I'm going to give you a few minutes to discuss. Go ahead and hit go. Ready, steady, go. All right. How did that go? I hope it was a good discussion. I hope it was a real discussion. I think this is a pretty helpful example of how to think differently, even though you have the same big ideas. So we want to meet consistently. How do we do that? Well, it's not the same hour each week. And again, I wish we were together because this would be such a good discussion. It's not at the same place each week. And so physically, it's a little bit different. Here are a couple ideas that I've heard that are going great. There's a website called mypostcard.com, and you can literally go in there and pick one of your pictures of your group, or maybe you doing something silly, pick an 8-pack or 16-pack or 32-pack, and for like $1.50, send your kids or your students each a postcard with a unique message on it straight from there. You do it all right on the website. But the beauty of it is it's not a text message, it's not a whatever, it's mail. And it shows up physically. And now it's not just reading it, there's also a physical, there's a what the heck is this? Sort of situation. So I think that's a brilliant way to show up physically, even though you're not close. There's a guy named Phil in Seattle that we know about. He does a great job of what he calls Sunset Club. So they meet outside and they watch the sunset together. It sounds kind of fun. They can spread out. And it is fun. But the interesting thing he said is strategically they got together at sunset because as you watch the sunset, you can't help but to think of the creator, which leads to deeper conversations. And even though they're spread out and outside, I think that's a really cool idea. I know my kids do porch parties. They end up, outside or in the driveway. They meet in small groups in the driveway. And we as parents kind of drop them off and drive around or go get a cup of coffee or nap in the car and then come back and pick them up. That's one way to do that. Gina Abbas up in Michigan. I know you guys are big fans. Gina Abbas up in Michigan does dance parties, 30-second dance parties, where she surprises kids. She shows up maybe with a small group leader or the small group leader does as well, and they have a driveway dance party. Again, it's just a physical connection. It's something I would never do, but I can totally see a lot of your personalities jumping in and doing something like that. Again, it's just a way to be present physically, just different ideas. Now, let's talk about digital, which is now our main course. It's now our main opportunity to do that. And a lot of churches have just moved to putting services online. A lot of churches have moved to just playing orange messages and then trying to build Zoom groups for small group leaders to discuss it. And I think that's a pretty good idea. But at the end of the day, I just want to create easy systems for our kids to connect. I want to plan for interaction. I want it not just to be them receiving information. They have to have the ability to reply. Here's the thing. They're going to open a chat box and you can either take part in the chat or you can let them chat about you. So may as well get strategic on the front end and open that chat box and make it part of the ongoing discussion. Polling features are super great ways to get kids to interact digitally. They are going to be interacting. We may as well have it be interacting with us or we be a part of the interaction as it goes. Mentally or showing up mentally, which is one of my favorite be present things. A couple of folks that I've talked to have said, it's really hard to kind of run the meeting digitally and be in charge of everything that's going on while I'm trying to interact, while I'm trying to read facial expressions with the students. And so they've moved to actually bring in a volunteer or having their husband or having their wife or having their girlfriend or boyfriend, whatever, actually really produce the room. So that just allows you to be free to interact, to talk to the kids, to talk to the students, and dig in. Random pop-ups online. I think I was talking to a leader the other day, and what she does with her girls is she'll just text and say, hey, 30 minutes, we're having a pop-up meeting to discuss the latest ... I think she said some sort of show. I was like, you're discussing that with your girls? She's like, yeah, it's not totally appropriate, but they all watch it, so it works. I maybe would go Mandalorian, something a little lighter, but just this random, for whatever reason, it not being planned, for whatever reason, when you say, hey, 30 minutes, we're having a meeting, that fear of missing out kicks in and the kids are showing up. And again, we talked about postcards as a great way to do that. Text messages, group chats, whatever you can do to be connected at different times is a great way to do that. Now, is it perfect? Nope. it wasn't. But if we go back to our hero, if we go back to Rosie the Riveter, and we think through that world, do you think it was perfect the first few weeks? It was never perfect. It was just tough stuff, and we learned and we got better as we went. All right, with that, we are going to dig in to the next one. We're going to dig into the next one and think about it in our new world with our main dish of digital for now and our side dish of physical. Let's talk about creating a safe place. So start to think about that, and I am going to disappear for just a second, and I'll be right back. Ready, steady, go. All right. We are back digging into Create a Safe Place again. This is a tough one. And to be honest, a lot hasn't changed in a long time when it comes to this one because we've always had safety stuff with technology in their digital world. A lot of us still need to catch up. In fact, the resource that I had the folks down at Ministry Safe put together, I made sure that they put in a bunch of policies, especially the technology policies. I would recommend just digging in and seeing what you like and what can be part of your training and policies. But just a few ideas. GroupMe works great because it can be much more public. The other thing that you can do is kind of treat two adults as administrators to the account. And so two adults can basically see what's going on all the time. We have the rule of no private conversations or as little private conversations as we can. If you teach or work with high school kids, you know that they're going to text you. And from there, I would say never as a leader delete your text messages with your kids. Always have the evidence that you had the conversation and that it was appropriate. You get into trouble when you start deleting those things and someone asks you to see them. So make sure that you do that. In general, this is true in digital world as it is in actual physical world, but we really want to watch for signs of abuse. When you start to see, again, an adult really taking their trust and that time and scooping someone away from the group, that's a problem. And if you start to see kids withdrawing from the group, that could be a problem. Also, and this is just a random note I was reading the other day, is there'll be sudden grade drops often when a kid starts to experience abuse. So when you hear those sorts of things, those are just data points. It doesn't necessarily mean it's happened, but we're looking for it and we're asking questions. Another good idea when it comes to digital groups and space like that is, I think a good rule amongst your group with your students is a no recording and a no screenshots policy. In fact, you can't record kids without parents' permission. So it's just a good policy to do that. And then really at the end of the day, I also think that we need to be mindful of the fact that some of our students have differing access to technology. It's amazing how much access folks have, but it still surprises me how often I run into someone who just can't get to the internet without being somewhere else besides home. So I hope that's helpful. Again, I wish we were in the same room. We could be discussing a lot of these ideas. I know you have so many more, and I'd love to hear them. With this next one, what I'd love for you to do is really dive in and think through partnering with parents, make it personal, and move them out. Again, give it a couple minutes of partner with parents, talking about some of the things that you've done there in the digital space. Make it personal, talk about some of the things you're doing for yourself as we are locked up. And then really talk about creative ways, and this may be the hardest one, to move them out or get them activated outside of the just coming to church idea. How do they be the church in this day and time? It should be a good discussion. I hope you enjoy it, think through it. Maybe if you're alone, take some notes thinking through it. And I'll be back in just a few minutes and we will dive into some of the things we're seeing work out there. Are you ready? Steady and go. All right. We are back. Let's talk about partnering with parents. I think one of the best ideas I heard from somebody was this idea of, hey, when you text a parent, don't just text a group of parents. Make sure that all of your text to parents are one-on-one text to parents. You're not just doing a group message, you're giving them access to you. And so a personal text message conversation is really important to a parent. Plus, they can scroll through it and find you when they need to text you back. This one person who's a great small group leader, their advice was that she tries to text parents at least once a quarter with something, and it's a personal text from her. Then that kind of keeps her up higher, that when they do need her, it's pretty easy to reach out. The other thing that happens, according to her, is when you reach out and text, maybe about nothing, just to say hello, it reminds them, oh, I've been meaning to ask you about something. And that may be the text. Hey, just checking in. I love Lindsay, and she seems to be doing great, but please let me know if there's anything I can help out with. That will usually get parents to respond with at least, oh my gosh, thank you so much. But it's one way to do it. A lot of leaders I'm seeing are building Facebook groups around the parents. I'd be careful here, especially the older your kids get. The more they hear the parents are talking, the more it might challenge how much they talk about within group. But again, it's a great way. It's easy access. Facebook's where the mamas are. So if you want a contact with the parents, often Facebook is the way to go. And again, you're creating that ongoing conversation, which really works well. Another small group leader I was talking to the other day, they use parentcue.org, parentcue.org, which is a website actually that kind of comes out of Orange, but it's directly to parents and has tons of helpful resources. So for instance, this small group leader found a free cell phone agreement or cell phone contract at ParentQ, basically gathered it up and used that and sent it out to parents and said, hey, I know we're all struggling with cell phones. This might help. And again, it started the conversation. It cued the parent to have a conversation, not necessarily with their kids, although it will, but really back and forth with you as the leader. So again, great small group leaders, great ministries partner with parents. And those are just some examples. As far as making it personal, that's a challenge for all of us. As you know, this time in digital world, it just can be tough. It can be lonely, but it also has a ton of upside. I mean, people are putting out free content like crazy. I don't know if you remember, but right when the thing started, right when everybody started locking down, there was just free content coming out to help like crazy everywhere. So that was really helpful. And I just think it's important to ask yourself those hard questions. How am I taking care of my spiritual life? I mean, we have digital sermons. We've always had them, but are we going to church? Are we still going to church? Do we still have our own community? Are we worshiping? Do we have a time of worship regularly? It's a good thing to ask yourself. Also, are you meeting in your small groups? I know at our church, there has been a dip in small group activity, which is understandable, but also this is also a huge opportunity to be able to meet in small groups because we don't have to go anywhere. We don't have to meet physically. We can literally set up 7:30 in the morning coffee. Had it this morning with my guys group, checked in. 2 of them were in their car, but we were connected, and it's really, really helpful. And the last one here that I just want to say out loud is I go to a counselor. And I think everybody should go to a counselor. And I think they should go to a counselor before there's an issue and not wait for an issue. And though you don't have to go every week, for sure, you can't afford it, or I can't afford it. And you can't go every month maybe, but there are maybe 3 months a year, or for a quarter you go for a year to check in with a counselor and really just check the oil. Make sure things are going. Have a safe person that you can talk to who knows how to crack you open and figure out what's going on inside. Going to a counselor has never been more easy because now we do it digitally, or at least it's an option. And so it's easier to do, faster to do, and it's just helpful. So make sure that you are doing that if you can. Finally, moving them out. And that might be one of the harder ones, is because we're trying to move kids to serve. And that has always been tough. First of all, a lot of people don't want a group of kids to come and serve. You don't want a group of middle school boys to help you come sort things at the food pantry. They're going to start a food fight before they do anything like that. But one leader I heard, and I love this, is that this is a season of loneliness for many kids. And so the idea of inspiring your kids to reach out, inspire your kids to kind of scroll through their phone once a day, maybe twice a day, and find someone they haven't talked to in a while and just say hello, just say thinking about you, just say something like that. You never know what sort of connections are going to happen. And that simple act is the act of being the church. You're just reaching out and caring for folks and working on them. As far as moving them on to what's next, I think the digital age has taught us something interesting. One of my favorite stories is a small group leader who does what's called a victory lap. And what that small group leader does is when they're done with high school, they don't stop meeting with them. They actually continue to meet with them, and they continue to meet with them in college. And even before COVID, that had to be done digitally because the kids went everywhere, whether it was college or service or whatever. And they just did their best to find times to continue to meet. In that time when everything is going crazy, when everything is changing, let's give them that one consistent community to stay connected to. And I just love the name, a victory lap. And it's a great way to do that. So maybe you have volunteers who are, finishing up with seniors, and maybe instead of having them kind of come back around and start with ninth graders or sixth graders, maybe it's our opportunity to allow them to connect and go with them onto that first year of what's next and do that victory lap. And again, that's just the tip of the iceberg. The best ideas in the world right now are not coming from people like me. They're not coming from people like Orange. They're coming from people like you who are out there trying some things. And again, I'm just trying to put together some of the stories I'm hearing. It's going to take people like us, people at Orange, people at YS, another year or so to gather those stories to really hear them all. So you're the horsepower when it comes to these ideas. One of my least favorite comments I get in my breakouts is, well, he wanted us to think about everything. I just want him to tell us what to do. Well, that's not going to change the world. What's going to change the world are leaders like you who are going to think for themselves, who are going to look at what's working out there and apply it really to your contexts. Mark Ostreicher says the best ministries are weird ministries. And they're weird not because they're weird. They're weird because they're unique, because a leader took time to figure out what their group of kids needed in their culture at their time. And so I think it's really important. And so as we wrap up, I just really would love to remind you of another, we've talked about it, but another revolutionary thinker, MLK. And I just love the idea of thinking beyond. I want to think beyond, man, I can't wait to get back, and I want to think beyond, won't it be great when we can all be together again? I want you to think beyond this approach of a main course and a side course idea. Here's the thing. We have always had students who couldn't make it to that physical space and time. Now they all can't, but we have always had kids who can't make it. We've always had students who are part of it. Some students, due to strenuous extracurricular activity as they're trying to get in college, can only be part of our group when it's digital. Some students, due to the realities of maybe a custody agreement, can only be there part of the time. Some students, due to the fact that they have to work for the family and make money, can only be there part of the time or rarely. And the reality is that this approach, this main dish, side dish approach, has been a model that's needed to change for a while. And so main dish and side dish, I think the future, and I think if we think beyond what student ministry can do, I've got my wife's plates here, this is much more what it looks like. It's the main dish and the main dish. It's the physical place where we need to have a place to meet physically because that's important. But the reality is not all kids can. And ideally, we want to move all kids to here. But we don't live in an ideal world. We live in a real world where we still want to talk to kids. We still want to engage them the best we can and push them, hopefully, to come back and meet physically. So I want to think beyond, man, I can't wait to get back to normal. There is a new normal. We have learned a ton during this time. I think the future looks, again, more like that. Same size plates, no side dish, no main dish. It's just all main dish. And with that, remember, revolutions, reformations, and movements are rarely the result of new information. But the start of your ministry, or your ministry, the start of this is giving your ministry and yourself permission and even pushing yourself to think differently about what we already know. I think it's so important. I think it's important we think simpler, similar to Eli Whitney. I think it's important we start to think backwards. I think it's important we start to think upside down. I think it's important we start to think irreverently about the systems that we work in. I think it's important we think again, or to think, how would we build it again, knowing what we know? I think it's important to think critically, to ask ourselves that question. What if this is our problem? I think that's a hard question. And gosh, I think it's so important to think beyond. That's how a reformation, that's how a revolution, that's how this movement is going to change. I just want you to know, I think you can do this. I am so honored and thankful to be a part of Leader Weekend, and I am available for whatever help that we can or I can provide. So please let me know, reach out, let Captain Jonathan know, and he'll get in contact with me and we'll figure it all out. I'll be praying for you, I'll be thinking about you, and I'll be cheering for you. We'll talk to you later.
Whether it's a side dish or a main course, believe me, I love mac and cheese. And of course, opportunities to pour into the lives of leaders and young people. The new reality we face is distance connectedness. And although it sounds like an oxymoron, it isn't going anywhere. We have to adapt because our mission doesn't change. Our goal of discipleship isn't different just because the medium isn't the same. How can we embrace digital and physical as both main dishes? Unfortunately, there's no one-size-fits-all easy answer. Shef said, "What's going to change the world is built on leaders examining what their groups need in the culture and in their group." It's time to break for lunch, but we want you to keep discussing. If you're not at a watch party, feel free to chat with us on YouTube or on our Eastern Michigan Youth Department Facebook page. Don't forget to join us at 1 p.m. for a Q&A with Shef, and then an all-important, super informative workshop on trauma-informed care at 2 p.m. Have a great lunch, everyone.